Colombia.
2017.
I remember that birthday party like it was yesterday. The feeling of anguish still haunts me. I was only 10 years old but sharp enough to know something was wrong that night. The party was lively, full of laughter and loud music, but hidden in the darkest corner of the basement, the smart ones of the group decided to start a game that would change our lives forever. It was a typical children's birthday party. Colorful balloons, sweets of all shapes and flavors, and loud music echoing through the house. Pedro's parents, the birthday boy, were friendly and welcoming, the kind of people who loved to see happiness on children's faces. But that night, amidst the contagious joy, something dark was about to happen. In the basement of the house, where the light was scarce and the air smelled musty, a group of children gathered. Pedro, always the leader of mischief, held an old compass, the kind used in geometry classes, but that night it would take on a much more sinister role. "Let's play the compass game," Pedro announced with a mischievous glint in his eye. Some laughed nervously, while others, like me, felt a chill down their spine. I had never heard of this game before, but Pedro's serious expression made me realize it was more than just a game. The rules were simple but cruel. We would sit in a circle around the compass, and it would spin in the center. Whoever was chosen by the compass would have to fulfill a dare, and if they refused, they would be pursued by the compass. The pursuit wouldn't stop until everyone had completed their tasks, and the stories circulating at school said the consequences could be deadly. The smart ones of the group, those who loved challenges and risky games, were excited by the idea. I, however, felt a knot in my stomach. Something about that compass, the way the candles cast eerie shadows on the basement walls, told me we were about to enter dangerous territory. But no one wanted to be the coward who ruined the fun, so we all sat in a circle, staring at the compass with a mix of excitement and fear. Pedro placed the compass in the center and began to spin it. The metallic point gleamed in the candlelight, spinning faster and faster until it suddenly stopped, pointing directly at Lucas. Lucas' sarcastic smile vanished when he realized the compass had chosen him. He tried to laugh, but we all knew he was terrified. Lucas' dare was simple but disturbing: enter the dark bathroom alone and say, "I see you," 3 times while looking in the mirror. We all held our breath as Lucas stood up, trying to appear brave. The silence was absolute, except for the distant sound of the party upstairs. Lucas entered the bathroom and closed the door behind him. Seconds passed that felt like hours until he finally emerged, pale and trembling but unharmed. He didn't say a word, but the fear in his eyes was evident. With the first round complete, the compass was spun again. And so, one by one, we were called to fulfill our dares. Each task was more frightening than the last, and the tension between us grew with each spin of the compass. Nervous laughter gave way to a silence heavy with fear. And that's when I realized this wasn't just any game. There was something evil in that compass, something that watched us and fed on our fear. As the night progressed, the atmosphere grew heavier. Each time the compass spun, the terror increased. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were invoking something beyond our understanding, something beyond our control. And it was with this thought that we began the second round, not knowing we were only at the beginning of a horror journey that would last 14 long months. The night was just beginning, but the feeling that something sinister was unfolding in the basement was undeniable. The compass, an apparently harmless object, now seemed to pulse with its own energy. All of us, sitting in a circle, were too young to fully comprehend what we were about to face, but there was a tension in the air that none of us could ignore. The compass spun again, its metallic point reflecting the flickering candlelight. It stopped at Mariana, the shyest and most sensitive girl in the group. Her eyes widened in fear, and she began to visibly tremble. Pedro, maintaining his leader tone, announced Mariana's dare. She had to go to the dark room at the end of the hallway, fetch any object, and bring it back. Simple, but the room was known to all of us as the doll room, a place we avoided out of pure instinct. Mariana stood up slowly, her knees seeming to buckle with each step. We watched her in silence, our fear binding us in an invisible chain. When she disappeared down the dark hallway, time seemed to stretch. We heard the sound of her hesitant footsteps, the creaking door, and then, an oppressive silence. Suddenly, a sharp scream pierced the air. We ran to see what had happened, finding Mariana collapsed on the floor, holding a porcelain doll with a vacant stare. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she had completed the dare. We returned to the circle, all visibly shaken, but the game had to continue. The next rounds only increased the intensity. Each dare was a climb into a living nightmare. Lucas, who had tried to maintain a tough facade, was next. His task was to spend 5 minutes in the basement closet, a claustrophobic and dark space where echoes of old horror stories were said to linger. When he emerged, pale and sweating, his superior smile had completely vanished. The compass spun relentlessly. Each time it stopped, a new name was called, and a new dare announced. The tension was palpable. At every moment, the room grew more charged with an energy that seemed almost tangible. The third dare was for Carla, who had to extinguish all the candles in the basement, leaving us in total darkness, and then relight them alone. The absolute silence during her task was broken only by the sound of a match striking and heavy breathing around. Then it was my turn. The compass stopped in front of me, and I felt a chill down my spine. Pedro, wasting no time, announced my dare. I had to go to the attic and bring back an old box that had been there for years. The attic always gave me the creeps, but there was no way to refuse. Each step toward the stairs felt heavier than the last. I climbed slowly, each step creaking under my feet. The attic was dark, with only a small window letting in a sliver of moonlight. I rummaged through the cobwebs and dust until I found the box. When I touched it, I felt a cold draft and a distant whisper, as if someone was right beside me. I ran back to the basement, clutching the box tightly, and only when I was back in the circle did I realize how much I was trembling. The game continued, and with each round, the sinister nature of the compass became more evident. This wasn't just an innocent children's game, we were messing with something we didn't understand, something that seemed to feed on our fear. The faces around me were pale, the eyes wide, and the realization that we were trapped in that evil game began to deeply root itself. The next few hours were a blur of terror and adrenaline. Each new dare was more dangerous and disturbing than the last. The compass showed no mercy, and with each spin, our fear grew. The atmosphere in the basement was charged with almost unbearable tension, and deep down, we knew we were only beginning to understand the true horror of the compass game. The days after that night in the basement were filled with oppressive anxiety. Each of us tried to continue with our normal lives, but the weight of the compass game followed us wherever we went. School, which had once been a place of laughter and play, now seemed enveloped in an invisible shadow. I began to realize something was wrong. The first to disappear was Carla. One day, she was there, laughing and making weekend plans, and the next day, she simply didn't show up at school. Rumors started to spread. Some said she had run away from home, others that her parents had sent her to live with a distant aunt. But we, who had been in the basement that night, knew the truth was much darker. After Carla, it was Lucas' turn. He had become quieter, more introspective. He stopped making sarcastic jokes and started avoiding looking directly at any of us. I caught him several times looking at the compass, which Pedro kept hidden in his backpack, as if he was trying to decipher some sinister secret. Until one day, Lucas also disappeared. There was no explanation, just the void left by his absence. The tension between us grew every day. Mariana, who had always been my best friend, started acting strangely. She murmured to herself, and her eyes were always wide, as if she was seeing something no one else could. I asked her several times what was happening, but she just shook her head, refusing to talk about it. Until one night, she showed up at my house, trembling and sweating, with scratch marks on her arms. She said the compass had come to her in her dreams, and each time she closed her eyes, it was there, spinning and spinning, closer every night. Pedro, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy it all. He liked the power the compass gave him over us. But I could see that even he was starting to tire of the game. The pranks became rarer, and he started avoiding being alone. It was as if he felt the compass was watching, waiting for the right moment to act. Then something happened that shook us deeply. We were at school on a regular day when we heard a scream coming from the girls' bathroom. We ran to see what was happening and found Raquel, one of the girls who always hung out with Carla, lying on the floor, hysterically crying. She kept repeating between sobs that the compass had appeared in the sink, spinning on its own, and that a whispering voice had told her she would be next. That was enough for us. We decided we needed to find out how to end the game. We started researching ancient rituals, curses, and ways to exorcise spirits. But the truth is, we were just children, playing with things far beyond our understanding. Every attempt to stop the compass only seemed to strengthen it. The situation became unbearable when another tragedy occurred. Arthur, who until then seemed to be the most skeptical among us, was found dead in his bed. The cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but we knew the truth. We knew he had been the compass's next victim. As days passed, paranoia took hold of us. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sudden sound made us jump in fear. We started avoiding the compass, pretending it didn't exist, but that only made things worse. It seemed that the more we tried to ignore it, the more it became a constant presence in our lives. The group of friends that was once united was now completely shattered. We no longer trusted each other. Each was on their own, trying to survive each day without being the next victim. Classes became a blur of dread and expectation, and nights were spent in vigilance, afraid to close our eyes. And it was in this state of constant terror that something in me began to change. I realized that the compass fed on our fear, and the only way to face it was to stop being afraid. But that was easier said than done. The psychological terror it inflicted was deep, and each of us was marked by it in a way only we could understand. But what I didn't know, and would only discover later, was that the compass had its own plan, an end we could never have imagined. And this realization would be the prelude to the most terrifying and frightening conclusion any of us could foresee. The tension reached its peak when Mariana disappeared. Her absence was a devastating blow to all of us, especially to me, as we were so close. In the days that followed, the school was in a frenzy of rumors and theories about her disappearance. Teachers and parents seemed lost, unable to understand how so many children could disappear without a trace. But we knew. We knew the compass was behind it all. One night, we woke up to a desperate scream echoing through Pedro's house. We ran there, finding him in his room, trembling and sweating, his eyes wide with pure terror. He babbled something about the compass, which had come to him in a dream, showing the faces of our missing friends, all distorted by suffering. That night, Pedro finally understood the gravity of what he had unleashed. The compass, which had once seemed just an inanimate object, now displayed an almost conscious presence. It seemed to know exactly how to torment each of us, exploiting our deepest fears and turning them into terrifying realities. Pedro, who had always prided himself on his bravery, was reduced to a state of constant panic, jumping at every shadow and unexpected sound. The breaking point for me was when I started having visions. At night, in my room, I saw shadows moving on the walls, heard whispers that seemed to come from all sides. Each time I closed my eyes, the compass was there, spinning slowly, its point always pointing at me. I could barely sleep, and when I did, I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. It was in this state of near insanity that we gathered for the last time. Me, Pedro, and Lucas, the only ones still physically present but mentally destroyed by the game. We decided we needed to face the compass once and for all, finish what we had started before it destroyed us completely. We met at Pedro's house, in the same basement where it all began. The place now seemed even gloomier, as if it absorbed all the light and warmth around it. The candles were lit again, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the compass was in the center of the circle, waiting. We took our places in silence, each of us with the grim determination that this would be the last round, no matter what happened. Pedro spun the compass, his hands trembling. The object spun slowly, as if prolonging the moment, savoring our fear. Finally, it stopped, pointing at Lucas. The dare was the most terrifying yet. Lucas had to spend the night in the basement, alone, with the compass. He tried to protest, but we knew there was no other option. If we refused, the compass would pursue us to death. We left Lucas there, his eyes wide with fear as he watched us climb the stairs. We spent the night awake, listening to every sound, every creak, waiting for something terrible to happen. When morning finally came, we descended to the basement. We found Lucas huddled in a corner, his eyes glassy and vacant. He was alive, but something inside him had irreparably broken. Next was Pedro. His dare was the cruelest. He had to bury the compass in a distant location and never look back. We took his father's car and drove to a forest on the outskirts of town. There, under the pale dawn light, we dug a deep hole. Pedro held the compass with trembling hands, hesitating before finally throwing it into the hole and starting to cover it with dirt. Each shovelful of earth seemed to lift a bit of the weight off our shoulders. When we finally finished, we felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the weight of the compass was being buried along with it. We returned to the town in silence, each lost in our thoughts. But deep down, I knew the horror hadn't ended. I felt a dark presence watching us, a warning that the compass could return at any moment. That night, for the first time in months, I managed to sleep without nightmares. But when I woke up, I found a small scratch on my hand, in the same spot where the compass used to touch me. And I knew that, although we had buried the compass, the terror it brought to our lives would never be completely eradicated. The game had changed us forever, and somehow, it was still there, in the shadows, waiting. The days following our desperate attempt to bury the compass were strange and unsettling. On one hand, there was a feeling of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from our shoulders. On the other, a lingering shadow of uncertainty hung over us. We knew the compass could never be truly destroyed, and the terror it brought to our lives would leave deep, lasting scars. Returning to the school routine was an immense challenge. Most teachers and classmates noticed the change in us. Pedro, once so full of life and leadership, was now a ghost of himself, avoiding eye contact and isolating himself most of the time. Lucas, although physically present, always seemed distant, his eyes glassy, staring at something no one else could see. I wasn't the same either. The constant fear, the feeling of being watched, never really left me. Nights were the worst, every sound, every shadow, brought back memories of that infernal compass. The slightest noise made my heart race, and I often found myself awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something terrible to happen. One night, weeks after we buried the compass, I had a dream. I was back in Pedro's basement, but this time, I was alone. The compass was there, in the center of the circle, spinning slowly. A whispering voice, cold as ice, whispered my name. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing uncontrollably. I knew, somehow, the compass was still connected to us. At school, the situation worsened when we discovered the police were investigating our friends' disappearances. They had few leads, but the parents and community were in an uproar. Pedro and I were questioned several times, and though we tried to explain we knew nothing, there was an unspoken understanding between us that the truth could never be revealed. Who would believe a story about a cursed compass demanding deadly dares? The constant pressure and fear began to take their toll. Lucas had a nervous breakdown during a math class and was taken to a psychiatric hospital. Pedro moved to another town with his parents, hoping to escape the terror that pursued him. And me? Well, I stayed here, trying to live a normal life but knowing I would never be the same. Years passed, and the terror of the compass slowly turned into a distant memory, but never completely forgotten. I became a more reserved person, with few friends and a constant distrust that something terrible could happen at any moment. The compass taught me to never let my guard down, to always be vigilant. Then, one day, something strange happened. I received a letter with no return address. Inside, there was only a sheet of paper with a familiar drawing, a compass, spinning in a circle. And next to the drawing, a short message: the game never ends. The fear I thought I had overcome returned with full force. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Someone, or something, was reminding me the compass still had power over me. Since then, I live with the certainty the compass is somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return. The feeling of being watched never left me, and I often find myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that familiar metallic gleam. The compass game changed my life forever, and somehow, I know it never really ended.